Tim Petrowich here for Dateline Marion, and when I'm here in August, it means only one thing. It means it's time for football season, and again, we're talking with Marion head football coach Kerry Martin, and I know we talk about this every year, but this is the time of the year where football coaches get a little nervous and excited, isn't it?
Nervous and excited. That's right, yeah. It's a mixture, it's a mixed bag of a lot of different feelings, and we are excited, we're anxious, a little bit nervous maybe. There's a lot of unknowns. Anytime you start the season, high school football has no preseason scrimmage. So the first game is the first real competition you're going to face, and it's not 7-on-7, that's for sure.
No.
It's not offensive linemen doing one-on-ones. It's real football, and it's going to get real on Friday about 7:30 at Mahomet.
Now, we've talked a little bit in the off season, and one of the things you talked about after the scrimmage last Friday night was that this is kind of a young club. You're going to have to play some sophomores that don't have a whole lot of varsity experience, and only 10 seniors on the roster.
That's right. Yeah. So it's an exciting year. We have a lot of really good football players. I think we feel like we got some guys that are going to surprise some people. They're going to say, "Where'd they get that guy?" And some guys played last year and played well. Some guys played last year and I think are greatly improved. And we've got some guys that didn't play a lot last year that I think are going to be a pleasant surprise to people. The main concern is that all of our depth is young. And when I say young, I mean inexperienced as well as young. Our roster has a very large sophomore group. Our junior and senior class aren't real big, so a lot of our depth comes from our younger kids, and a lot of those kids are going to be great football players someday, but they need to be ready to help us at the varsity level right now. And they've really worked hard this summer to kind of move and elevate themselves to that level. But, it's still a big step, so we're looking forward to seeing how they do.
You had some players who played significant time who graduated, but you look, and I'll start on the offensive side, you look at some names that are familiar names, and it starts with Drake Gravatt, who was the featured running back last year, and he's back again this year and has an opportunity to really kind of take a leadership role and take on a role of guiding this offense.
Yeah, Drake has just really had a great off season, and we'll lean on him pretty heavily on both sides of the ball. Frankie Horner and Bryce Cabanis had playing time last year. They're back. I think that the majority of our experience comes from the offensive line, where we really returned 4 starters. When you count Kobe Mayfield, who was a starter 2 years ago, didn't play last year and is now back. You add him to 3 other returning starters, Colby Carter, Cameron Kaiser, and Davin Melvin. You got 4 starters on the offensive line that are back. So I feel like the real strength of the offense will come from the offensive line. And we have senior quarterback Lucas Will getting his first chance to be a starter. He had some really good moments last year against Mount Vernon and Joliet Catholic. And when he got in the game, he had some really good moments. So we are, I feel like we got a nice mix. They play well together. We've gotten really good leadership all off season, all summer long. So I'm real proud of the 10 seniors I've got who've really stepped up, and I think they give us a good chance to have a good season. But certainly we're going to lean pretty heavily on those guys that have that returning experience.
You mentioned Frankie and Bryce, and they, especially late in the season, became really reliable pieces of the passing game, especially.
They did, and I think we want to be that balanced team again, of offense and defense and special teams and passing and running, and we love that balance. We don't want to have to lean on one side of the ball or lean on one phase of the game and say this is our strength, and we want it all to be good. And so we're looking for balance offensively. We're hoping we can be a run threat as well as a pass threat, not let people key on one or the other, and hopefully that'll make both better. But we've tried to define what this group's skill sets best fit, and they've really responded well. We've had a really good summer. We've had a really good camp, and now we've had a good 2 weeks leading up to game week this week. So a lot of excitement.
There were some really shining moments for one of the younger players on the squad, and I want to mention him just briefly because I think he's one of those guys who may turn into that deep threat, and that's Vincent Newsom, rather. And he had a couple of nice plays last year that were big plays that came out of nowhere.
He did, including the playoff victory here against Rich East. I mean, he had a huge touchdown catch in that ball game, and he didn't play as much as maybe Drake Rabat, but he certainly was a component in the offense last year. And as a freshman, saw some time at receiver, and I think as the year went on, he got more and more, including the big game against Rich East. So he's bigger, he's stronger, he's got some experience now. I think his confidence level is better now that he's had a year of varsity football under his belt. So certainly Vince will be a big threat, I think, for us. He gives you that down the field threat, as you said, to stretch the field, and so like I said, I like the components we've got. We've got some good size in our receiving core, which is something we haven't had. We got a strong offensive line, a quarterback that can run and pass. So if we can stay healthy, that mix could be really good.
I want to talk about that size for a little bit, and I think back to the we sat and looked at the roster the year that the Wildcats made the quarterfinal at Metamora, and counted 5 total players on the roster that were 200 pounds or more. And then we looked at Metamora's, all their skill players were 200 pounds or more.
Yeah.
So I looked at the roster earlier today, 16 players 200 pounds plus on the Marion roster. And I know you're going to say, well, you can't coach size, but at the same time, what's drawn those players to the program? Because that's, those size kids were in the school before, but now they're part of the football program.
That's a good question. I don't know that I know the answer. I just know there's kind of an ebb and flow sometimes with size on teams. I mean, I'm always amazed, for example, how Triad has always had big players.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even a couple of years ago, I went to a playoff game after we lost to Morris. They played Morris the next week,
right.
So I went over and watched the game. And even their youth football kids were enormous in their youth football jerseys. So, like, they're producing linemen year after year. I mean, big kids. We have traditionally not done that, but we've had a few years we have. I think we have good size this year. 2010 and 9, 10, and 11, I thought we were really strong in the offensive line and had really good size. But I think, normally you're right. We're not a huge team, and you think a school of 1,100 kids or so would year in and year out have some good size. But it's funny you say that about the quarterfinal team only having 5 guys. I didn't realize that they were that small. But yeah, it's a bit of an ebb and flow, I think, with high school sports. I think speed can be a little bit like that, size can be a little bit like that. And right now we're blessed with some decent size. It's not great, but it's good, and it's always good to have that combination of speed and quickness, intelligence in your players, and the little size.
Well, and when you got the quickness that you've got in your offense, and then you've got a little bit of that size on that offensive line, and you talk about with 4 guys coming back, doesn't take very much for the back to hit that hole as long as the hole's there.
That's right, and our backs have been doing a good job of that, and our line has been a real positive for us. And I think, we always talk to the kids about when you get better, when you improve, even just a little, you make everybody around you better. And when you've got an offensive line that continues, all 5 of them, getting better every week, they're making the quarterback better because he's going to have more time to throw. The running backs are better holes to run through. And the receivers get better because the quarterback has more time to get them the ball. So I think that offensive line can make Lucas, the receiving core, and the running backs better. And in turn, when our running game is better, certainly the receivers now have better options of catching the ball, and the defense will have to focus on the run game. So it's all so interconnected together. And I feel like this team has that good feeling of balance that I love. And we're not having to sit on one guy or one side of the ball, or one theme to make us a good football team.
We've talked a lot about the offense, and the defense is the team that's going to be a little bit younger with more players to replace. But there are some guys who are coming back on that defensive unit that were key contributors last year.
Yeah, I think, you're always worried. 2 years ago we had a brand new defense. Last year that defense had 9 or 10 starters returning for another year. Now we're back to that kind of, a lot of fresh faces again. But, Coach Dunning and Coach Wimberly and Coach Skeet of the D-line have done such a good job in getting those guys ready. And we have a lot of new faces, but we like the faces that we've got. We do return Frankie Horner and Drake Ravat. We do return Vince Newsom, who played some secondary. Jonathan Tucker's played some secondary for us. We have Brennan Fox, who played some linebacker last year. He returns. Davin Melvin, I think is going to be a good defensive lineman for us. But those guys that like the offense, I think, have tapping into some of the young guys, some of the juniors, I think, have stepped up and played pretty well for us. It's just, we're running the same scheme, but I think this defense will have its own personality, just like each year your defense does. And Coach Dunning has a knack for finding what they can do well, and then they go out and execute it. So we're optimistic.
I think one of the big keys, especially when you've got a young defense, is making sure you can get a lot of guys to the ball in a hurry.
Amen. Yeah, that's a big part of it. And that ability to swarm and pursue and have that effort, man. Because, I remember Coach Kill saying years ago, if you can get your kids to play hard every snap, that's half the battle. And I think sometimes kids think they're playing hard, and there's another level they can go to. And this group has played hard for us. And as I said to you after the game, when you've got good attitude and you've got great effort and you've got a good work ethic, it gives you a chance to be successful. And we have gotten those three things from our kids from last spring on.
So you open the season Friday night at Mahomet-Seymour, a team that you haven't played before. You're familiar with their conference because you've seen Charleston and you've seen Mattoon on a regular basis, and they're in that conference. I'm looking at some information on Mahomet-Seymour, and they got a new coach this year.
They do.
They are putting in a new offense. It is, the words that are used are up-tempo, high-speed, frenetic, in a new offense with some young players. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah. Yeah. We're familiar with what he has done in the past as a head coach, and so I don't think he's not trying to fool anybody or surprise anybody. He absolutely does what he does, and he's done it well. I mean, as an offensive coach, they've got some kids. They've got some weapons coming back. They got a couple of big receivers. They quarterback's a big, strong kid. We've had to kind of piece together our information because we don't have a lot. Obviously he wasn't the coach there last year, so their last year's films are limited in what we can, discern from them. But I think they'll pose a real strong threat to us. The good news is our kids see spread up tempo football every single day. So that's the good news. It's not, when we face Jerseyville week 2, which is an option team, which is something a little bit out of the box, and this is more in our comfort zone, but it doesn't make it any easier to defend. I just think it makes you more familiar, and so you can continue doing some things you do every day in practice instead of some different things. But I think it'll come down to matchups. It'll come down to guys up front whipping or not whipping the guys up front, and how well we tackle and how well we pursue and get guys to the ball. And like I tell you this every year, when we play week 1, you're playing as much against yourself as you are against the enemy. And I think one of the great things about week 1 is you can't beat yourself. You need to limit the mistakes, limit your turnovers, limit your penalties, and make sure you take care of Marion first and foremost. And I think that's kind of been our focus, and we're hoping that that works out.
And I think one thing too, and you'll probably agree with this, is really important, is when you've got a team, and you talked about some of the players they have, but a lot of them are still juniors.
Right.
So they're fairly young. It's a new offense and a new coach. I think the start of the game is really important for your club to get, while they're still trying to learn and feel their way around, to jump on them and kind of get them down a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, it's we've been in that situation. I remember in 2005 when we went to the shotgun spread for the first time. We went out there with all these hopes and the anticipation of what the spread shotgun was going to do for us, and it was a struggle a little bit because it was new to us, and we weren't exactly sure how to counterpunch everything we were getting defensively against us, and we found a way to win that first game, and it was a confidence boost. But you're right, it's anytime you start a new program, and he's the head coach of a new school there, new program, there's always challenges, and you're right, good fast starts and early victories in the season can make a big difference in the overall season that you have.
Another road trip. We
Yep.
talk about that all the time. It's
Yeah.
not really that much different than even a couple of conference trips.
Right.
2 hours and 45 minutes, and
Yeah.
you've been to Champaign, you've been to, all over the place in the season opening game before. So not really a whole lot different anymore, is it?
No, we try to just have a really good itinerary, and we never make an excuse about the road trip. It's about execution and preparation, and we try to spin it positively. We got our kids on the bus at 2:00 in the afternoon on Friday, and we're going to be able to use that to kind of have a captive audience and feed them what we want to feed them, and watch film on the bus, and be able to have position meetings, and just kind of make sure we're all on the same page, and so I don't, I think too often we make too big a deal out of road trips, and I think when you're not accustomed to them, I guess they can be, but our guys have traveled throughout their high school careers, so it'll just come down to making sure we have a good itinerary, we keep things relaxed, but we keep the kids focused, and just go out and have fun and play hard on Friday.
A slightly different start time, just to remind people, 7:30 instead of 7.
Good news is we start a little later, so you don't have to rush out of town. The bad news is we get home later.
That's true. That's true.
But that's okay.
Hey, it's a holiday weekend.
Well,
so.
yeah, who cares, right?
Right.
And if you win the game, you don't care what time you get home.
That's right.
You don't care how far the trip is, what time you get home, as long as you come home with a W. And so we hope we can do that for our fans.
All right, that's Marion head coach Kerry Martin. They play the Mahomet-Seymour Bulldogs Friday night at 7:30 in Mahomet. For Dateline Marion, I'm Tim Petrowich.